Well, we've concluded the legislative session. Disappointing, to say the least, that the session ended without a transportation bill, without a bonding bill. Those are serious unmet needs of Minnesota. There are some good and bad features in other legislation that was passed. The tax bill has some very good features for student loans, for child care tax credit, for working family credit. It's a terrible feature with reducing taxes on tobacco companies. I can't comprehend why that was considered to be good public policy. The supplemental bill, I'm pleased that they passed that. Didn't have everything that I wanted, but it has some of those measures, such as a pre-kindergarten, that I said from the outset were very, very important. I'm particularly disturbed by the way the House in particular treated the University of Minnesota. You know, this is one of the most, if not the most important institutions in our entire state. And I was at a groundbreaking earlier today in Plymouth, where in the city of Plymouth, the mayor said there are 130 medical technology companies located there. My efforts to build up the medical school at the University of Minnesota are critically important to private sector economic development and to job creation and to making Minnesota, along with what's going on in Rochester with Mayo Clinic, the epicenter of healthcare advances, better quality healthcare for all of our citizens, and the medical technology and the jobs that creates. And for the House to provide virtually no additional funding in the supplemental bill for either the University of Minnesota or the MnSCU system, and to leave out of the bonding bill, from what I've seen, I haven't even seen the entire bill, my number one priority, the health sciences building there for the University of Minnesota, critical failures on the part of the House, and I've told, quote unquote, some House members have a problem with the university. Well, grow up and get over it. You know, this institution is too important to all of Minnesota to have some petty concerns and the kind of vindictiveness shown here for eliminating the funding for that critically important institution. So I'll be redressing that if we are going to proceed any further, which remains to be seen in the weeks ahead. Speaker Dowd called me this morning and expressed an interest in the 4 leaders meeting with myself this afternoon. There's not a consensus on that, so that meeting is not going to happen. I think everybody needs some time to get some deserved sleep, including all of you, and to get the dust settled, and for me and my staff to be able to receive this legislation, to read the legislation, which somebody needs to do, and to assess the consequences for Minnesota of the various bills. So I will be proceeding expeditiously to review them after we've received them. I said on radio this morning I'd sign or not sign bills within 48 hours, but I'm going to qualify that to say within 48 hours after we have received the actual bills themselves. I haven't even seen a spreadsheet on the bonding bills, so I can't comment on any of the particulars there. Like many of the members who are acting in the haste of last night, I haven't seen the language in various bills that I certainly want to review carefully and discuss with various concerned parties before making any decisions. So whether or not there'll be a special session, I can't say today. I haven't given it anymore. I've given it 14 hours and 4 minutes of thought, and I haven't come to any conclusions one way or the other. And again, I'd want to meet at some point in the days ahead with legislative leaders and to consider what their interests are and see where we proceed. But I don't have any answers for you today. Glad to respond to questions.
Governor, if you do call a special session, are you thinking about starting over on bonding and transportation, or would you use what they had as their agreement?
I haven't made any decisions about that and haven't had a chance to discuss that with the leaders.
Governor, how about the tax bill? Are you upset enough about the tobacco cuts to take down the whole bill?
I don't think so, but I haven't seen the entire bill, so I'm going to reserve judgment until I see it. I don't understand why in the midst of all the other priorities and matters that were left out of all the various bills because there supposedly was not enough money available, that they would see fit to give $40 million in tax breaks to the tobacco industry. It's just total, I don't know where it came from, I don't know who was behind it, but it's just it's very, very distressing.
On transportation, yesterday Senator Bach said that he had an agreement with the Speaker on including money for transit in that final bonding and transportation bill. Curious, in the final hours there in negotiating the transportation deal, I mean, how involved was the administration in crafting that, or was that something that was crafted by the top two leaders in both chambers?
I think we were very involved up until the very end, at which point I don't know who was involved with what about what. We were not aware of the final, and there's a disagreement between the Speaker and the Majority Leader about what was agreed to or not agreed to or understood or not understood. I was not party to those last conversations. I don't have any way to assess whose version is correct. But the very last, say, 2 hours, I can't even say who was involved in the legislative process, but we were not directly involved in either the bonding or the transportation at that point.
Governor Dayton, Speaker Dowd had told his members to stay in town for the next day or two in case there's a special session. Sounds to me like they're free to go home.
I communicated that to the Speaker that they should feel free to go home. There won't be a special session in the next 48 hours. I don't know when we'll meet to consider what the options are, but I think everybody needs, they knew they had a deadline at midnight last night. They didn't meet that deadline, and in the haste of the final moments there, democracy was not well served. The public was cut out of discussion, and most of the legislators were cut out of discussion. I'm told quite a number of them didn't even have a chance to read the bills before they were asked to vote on them. I don't think rushing forward is the proper course of action.
Senator Bach said that he would be open to a special session in the summer to the fall. How does that timeline sound to you?
Again, I'm not going to comment on. I haven't made any decision. Obviously, we have the summer and the fall, but I'm not going to make any decision about that till I've had a chance to talk with the leaders and consider the options.
Governor, are you happy with the $25 million for preschool?
Very much so. Very important to provide more pre-kindergarten opportunities for children, 4-year-olds and their parents. It's been enormously popular. Everywhere it's been instituted, we hear again and again. Lieutenant Governor's been even more active than I am, meeting with pre-kindergarten teachers and schools around the state. They talk about the enormous benefits to children of that early opportunity. The kindergarten and first-grade teachers talk about how beneficial it is to school readiness for kindergartners. So there's just every reason to be expanding this opportunity. This is voluntary, but the school districts that want to take advantage of it will be able to proceed.
Representative Murphy was not very happy with that licensed teachers are not required for pre-K. Do you have any problem with that?
I definitely think that it should have been licensed teachers. That's the way the school system works, but it is what it is.
At the heart of a lot of the disagreements last night was the Southwest Light Rail and light rail transit in general. Speaker of the House said that that killed $700 million for transportation projects around the state and the bonding bill. Would you react to that, please?
Well, I think it's very unfortunate the political games that are being played with Southwest Light Rail project. The broader picture, which is the one I would expect legislators to take, since they represent the best interests of the entire state, is that a good metropolitan transit system is essential to a healthy metropolitan economy and therefore healthy to the Minnesota economy. And I've asked Met Council previously, about 6 months ago, to say what are the options if we don't have a Southwest Light Rail line, and there aren't any. There's not a rapid bus transit route that goes from Eden Prairie to downtown Minneapolis, even if you use the shoulders on some of the existing highways. So what the denial of that project and denial of funding, therefore, for all of metropolitan transit is to force more and more people onto the highways, create more and more congestion, leave the 750,000 additional people who will be living in this area in the next 25 years with no alternative but to crowd in onto the highways. And anybody who thinks that that's a benefit to anywhere in the state of Minnesota is just not in touch with reality. So I'm very, very disappointed. I'm very disappointed that again, the Southwest Light Rail line has been made the campaign slogan for those who oppose public transit for the metropolitan area, because it's one of these issues that's just too important for people to be playing narrow-minded political games with.
Governor, you've said several times that you insist on ongoing transportation funding. The bill last night would be 1 year. Can you live with a 1 year transportation package if it comes down to that?
Probably not. I mean, I have to see, what, I've said that consistently. I believe that anything short of that is a failure. And I don't think anybody should be able to pretend to their constituents or anybody else that this, even that kind of stopgap measure was anything other than a failure of the legislature to provide for the additional new revenues necessary to fund $600 million a year for 10 years. Now, having said that, would I reject something acknowledging that failure to do something rather than nothing over the next year? I'm not going to rule that out, but I'm very, very disappointed that both the lack of long-term funding solution for transportation and the failure to provide for metropolitan transit, and I think those are both significant failures regardless of what happens hereafter for the rest of this year.
Governor, I know you're undecided on a special session, but can you imagine a scenario under which you go a whole year without there being a bonding bill or any new money for transit?
Well, it would be a serious setback for the economic vitality of the state, and that's what I'll have to weigh in the balance. I mean, the bonding bill is our projects all over the state of Minnesota that are vitally needed, that put people to work building them, and to put that off for another year just delays our future economic growth. And so again, I have to weigh in balance, but I think it'd definitely be in Minnesota's better interest to have a good bonding bill approved in the near future, and that's what I will certainly, that's the position I'll take with the legislative leaders, if they're willing to make, they couldn't agree between themselves last night on what should be in or not in the bonding bill. So we're starting at a point of impasse, and I don't know, what the willingness is on anybody's part to go beyond that. They weren't willing to compromise up until through the final hours last night. I don't know what's going to change that equation, but hopefully they'll hear from Minnesota. So hopefully they'll hear when the spreadsheet and the bill for the bonding finally comes out, and the $995 million of projects that are specified, and then I hope people in those communities affected by those projects will make it clear that that's unacceptable. And I hope the other $3 billion worth of projects that were left on the table will also express their extreme displeasure that this is not a bill that is sufficient to meet Minnesota's needs.
Governor, thank you. What should voters' takeaway be, Minnesotans' takeaway, on divided government in Minnesota, something you've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks?
Well, I don't think it didn't produce what Minnesota needs. It didn't produce the transportation bill. It's going to be necessary to allow the state's economy to grow and our social environment to thrive over the next decade. And the lack of metropolitan transit is in the same way. It's going to choke off the economic and social vitality of the metropolitan area. So we've said for 2 years now this is vitally important in the future of Minnesota. Everybody agreed what was necessary, $600 million a year in new revenue each year for the next decade. The House leaders agreed to that. The Senate leaders agreed to that. I agreed to that. Everybody agreed to it. So we knew what the marker was, what was necessary, and they fell short. In fact, after the Duluth convention, they backtracked, the House Republicans, and said they wouldn't allow even a tab fee increase. So we're back to nothing but general fund money one time. That's a totally inadequate response. It's a failure.
Governor, at what point did you, watching the transportation negotiations, at what point did you recognize that a long-term deal wasn't going to happen?
Well, I mean, frankly, I didn't rule that out until, I don't know, about 11:30 last night. I mean, they were still, discussing what their alternatives were. So I never, it didn't seem like it was coming together, but, you know, as Yogi Berra said, it ain't over till it's over, and the Minnesota legislature, even then, it isn't over. So, you know, you just have to wait and see how it plays out. But
Governor, how about how it played out? Do you think the legislative process needs to be reformed through changes in rules or legislation so that things don't fail again?
Really,
Chaos?
and from the conclusion, I mean, I think the shortcomings of what happened, the process last night should be, are apparent to certainly to me and others. I don't think this is a time to kind of cast or try to come up with proposals for how it should be improved.
With two leaders now floating the idea of a special session, rather than you requesting one as you did twice last year, are you in a stronger negotiating position here when it comes to your priorities and what you would like to perhaps see in a special session, if one happens?
Well, they're Minnesota's priorities. They're which, you know, and I'm not, you know, if we do have a special session, one of the real challenges will be everybody's going to jump in with what they want that they didn't get during the regular session. So you know, we're going to have to, and coming to any kind of agreement about how to limit the agenda for that special session. And I'm getting ahead of myself here, but if we were to do it, is going to be a part of the challenge. So, but you know, I'm going to focus on what Minnesota needs. It's not what I need. You know, it's what Minnesota needs. And when you shortchange the University of Minnesota, you shortchange the economic and social vitality of the future of Minnesota all over the state. I mean, to let issues that they brought into this, the petty vindictiveness that was demonstrated to the university in terms of supplemental funding and in terms of the bonding is just was really uncalled for and really irresponsible. So someone really eliminating the sales tax exemption for the Minnesota High School League because their position they took on transgender bathrooms, costing the league $800,000. That money was going into a scholarship fund for low-income families and students to be able to participate in high school sports. So they're going to penalize all these kids out there who can't play sports because they're unhappy with a position, a very carefully considered position that the high school league took. The high school league is independent of me. It's independent of the legislature, as it should be. I make a couple of appointments, but basically they manage their own affairs. And for the legislature to say, well, we don't like a decision that you made thoughtfully, carefully, and so we're gonna shaft kids, is just, again, beyond the bounds of responsible governance.
What about Real ID?
Yeah, the police body cam bill didn't come out very balanced. It came out in favor of police. What are you thinking of doing with it? What do you say to people who really would like to see it not be that way?
Well, again, I have not made any decision. I did intervene in the final 48 hours and say that I would not support or sign a bill that had the and I want to be clear about my position on this. It was not the issue that the law enforcement could not review the video before they filed their reports. It was that they had the only right or ability to do so. The purpose of body cam, one of the principal ones, is to establish public confidence in these decisions that are made in the spur of the moment, but that need the body of public evidence to be available to the public. I believe anybody who's paid for by the citizens of Minnesota and who's wearing a body cam provided by the citizens of Minnesota, that everything that they do is everything I do is on the public record. And body cams mean that that public record should be available to everybody at the same time. And so my issue was not that I oppose law enforcement being able to review the video before they file their reports. That wasn't the issue for me. It was that they were given the exclusive right to do that, and meanwhile it could be withheld from everyone else. And you can debate that point back and forth, but the effect of it would be to destroy the public confidence in body cameras, which is the very purpose of the body cameras to begin with. So that was my concern about that particular measure. I appreciate that the legislature took it out. I know there are people who object to other parts of the bill, but there are also a lot of law enforcement throughout Minnesota who support it because they want some guidance. Otherwise, and you know, this if the absence of this legislation doesn't preclude any local government from making its own decisions on these matters. In fact, it would require them to do so because there wouldn't be any guidance in state statute. So there are a lot of benefits to local law enforcement about establishing these guidelines and procedures in the statute. But there are also some serious defects as well, and I haven't had a chance to assess or weigh it all in the balance.
Doesn't the State Data Practices Act, though, apply currently ever since the body cams have been out there? I mean, or are local police going to be making their own rules?
Well, it's my understanding that in the absence of legislation, I can't say they can't violate existing data privacy statutes, but they basically don't have the framework from which they in many key respects are going to have to make their own individual local decisions on the matters, including whether or not their officers can be able to review the video before they file their reports.
With
Real ID didn't happen. Fortunately, the federal government has postponed its point of sanctions into 2018, so there's a perfectly good chance next session for the legislature to reconsider this and try to find a conclusion. And I think no bill this year is better than a bad bill. So I think that's one that should be carried forward to next year. We'll have to be.
With the presidential election coming up in less than half a year, how does this all play out for the state of Minnesota?
I say a year is a millennium in politics, so we're half a millennia away from the next election. I can't foresee that. If I had that kind of crystal ball, life would be so much easier.
Talking about elections, as you travel the 87 counties this year,
In 86 days.
in 86 days, and we'll be counting,
I will be too.
are you going to be using that to beat up on, let's say, Republicans, so you can get a better, what you would foresee as a better DFL legislature? And how does that play into your decision to call a special session? In other words, would it be better for you to beat up on Republicans for those 86 days and get a better deal next year?
Well, the first one is my responsibility, as the legislature's responsibility, is to serve the people of Minnesota as best we can under the circumstances that the voters prescribed to us in November of 2014. So, as far as I'm concerned, as long as there's still the legislature and I'm governor, we have a responsibility to put the best interests of the state of Minnesota ahead of politics. And that's what I will do in terms of a special session, in terms of making that decision, in terms of whatever else. I'm going around 87 counties in 86 days because I love doing it in 2010. It put me back in touch with Minnesota in a way that I haven't been able to be over the last year or two. So I'm doing it, and I'm going to highlight issues that are outstanding, that are important, like water quality in areas where that's a relevant issue. But I'm not going, and I'll separate very clearly, and I'm sure you all will be watching me, as you have a right to, separate out the travel that I'll do and the meetings I'll be having. That'll be state business with political events that I'll fit in early morning or evening, and we'll clearly differentiate that in terms of the expenses and the like. I expect to be driving most, if not all, of these ventures, so put me back in touch firsthand with the quality of Minnesota's highway system, which the insights they get from traveling around the state like that, meeting with people, but just seeing the real world out there are invaluable. And so I'm looking forward to it, but it's first and foremost my reconnecting with Minnesota in a direct way and highlighting the issues that I want to bring to the 2017 session, such as improved water quality. And, again, I know everybody will be scrutinizing what I do, and I expect that, so it'll be straightforward.
On Real ID, it sounds like one of the hang-ups was the undocumented immigrant issue and them getting driver's licenses and the language in this bill allowing that to happen eventually. Is that your understanding of what held this up?
Yes.
And where do you stand on that issue?
Well, I've said before, with some reluctance, and my position has evolved, but I believe the people in Minnesota who are residents here need to follow the law. So I don't countenance people who don't have licenses and are driving in Minnesota. I don't. That's not acceptable. I've heard from enough law enforcement people who believe that the public safety would be better protected by enabling people who are out driving without a license to be able to go through the testing procedures and have a license so that they are better qualified to be on the road. So, I mean, I weigh the balance what I think is in the best public interest, and I've been persuaded over the last couple of years that my position changed, that public safety is better protected by allowing people who are undocumented to obtain less licenses, having gone through the necessary training and like as anyone else. So that's my position on it. I realize there's stark differences between people on mostly one side of the aisle and the other, but I think given that we're not going to incur any sanctions for the failure to pass a real ID bill this session, I think better off to carry it forward in the next year.
Follow-up, would you be willing to keep standing up for that issue, even if it threatens millions of other Minnesotans from getting compliant driver's license?
Well, people can get enhanced driver's licenses now. They have that option. And people who are, the only people this would, the absence of a real ID would affect, my understanding, are people who, for example, visit military bases or visit the Pentagon. These are, in most cases, professionals who understand they either have to get an enhanced ID or they have to get a birth certificate, both of which are options. For most citizens whose interface with all of this is getting on an airplane, they're not going to be prevented from doing so up until 2018. So we have the 2017 session, the opportunity to revisit this issue, and at that point, I will definitely feel the sense of urgency to get in compliance with the federal government.
If the bonding bill doesn't get resurrected, what do you think will be, from your opinion, the biggest loss to the state from those projects that could have been passed but won't be funded?
Well, I can give you 995 reasons. I haven't seen the spreadsheet, but however many projects there that aren't going to go forward, it's just a travesty. I mean, the water quality that I proposed, for which there was bipartisan support, which is essential to helping the small communities who can't afford water treatment projects make their water safe for their citizens. Again, the bill was seriously deficient from what I've heard leading up to the final version in the House on higher education, MnSCU, and the university. But again, you get a situation where something's better than nothing. They put a lot of transportation projects in as a way of funding those. It's not an acceptable substitute for the lack of a transportation bill. But again, anything that moves something forward in Minnesota that puts people back to work, or puts people to work, because we're pretty well building trades, but they're always looking for work. So whatever we're doing that makes investments that are going to better the state, those projects don't happen. It's everybody's loss.
Looks like lawmakers did have some time to work on a bill for the soccer stadium. Your reaction to where they are with that?
Well, the tax bill, it provides for the property tax exemption. It does not provide for the tax elimination of the sales tax on construction materials, but they can apply for a refund under existing law. So it's a little bit of a time delay in terms of obtaining that not in the absence of upfront credit. But I would hope that they would see that they got most of what they were looking for, and that the part that they didn't get is available to them through existing law.
Governor, you have 14 days to either sign or veto the budget and tax bill. Is that part of the special session considerations, or are those separate?
Again, I don't know when I'll get the bills, but I said earlier I'd intend to sign them within 48 hours. I don't think dragging this out for 2 weeks serves anybody's interest. I think whether the special session, whether or not there's going to be a bonding bill, what are the requirements to do that are matters that are standalone. I'm not going to hold the tax cuts for people or the supplemental budget, the areas that they did fund. I'm not going to hold those hostage to the other considerations. I think the bonding and transportation should be considered and enacted on their own merits. But I've got to get the bills. I got to get the spreadsheets first, and then I got to get a couple hours sleep, and then I got to read them, and then I want to talk with my staff. So we're going to take our time in terms of making assessment, but I'm not dragging that review process out for other reasons.
Did I misunderstand this? Does that mean if there is a special session, would it likely happen within 2 weeks?
I would guess it's, I can't say. I can't say. I don't feel that there's not a deadline like like last year at the end of the fiscal year. If we're going to do it, it's got to be done right, and it's got to so but I don't feel imperative to do it in 2 weeks, and that's why I'm not going to hold the bills hostage to getting a determination on a special session. That's a separate matter.
Governor, are the bonding and transportation bills linked? If there is a special session and these come up, do they both have to be acceptable to you, or will you consider each one on its own?
No, I consider each one separately, but they're intertwined because the legislature intertwined them. But I'm not gonna hold one hostage to the other. Okay, thank you very much.